Connaissance,
recherche,
sciences,
les sciences,
mathématiques,
théorie,
physique, philosophie,
conférences,
archéologie,
nature.
So one group was allocated to a weekly repayment system and another one to a monthly repayment system. So basically moving on directly between the weekly this was about the scheduled repayments. It was either weekly, monthly, or weekly involving meetings. So basically, the reimbursement rates, repayment rates were exactly the same in this particular study. So, as a conclusion, it doesn't look as though monthly reimbursement are essentials. So, third aspect is, and this was of a greater significance to all the theoreticians, it was the matter of the Solidary loan imposing on everyone. Basically, it was a joint responsibility for everyone within the group to reimburse. So if you're part of the group and you're not in a position to reimburse or repay the loan, then you will not have access to the next repayment or the next loan. So this is a joint liability. And I'm going to have to check whether the people in the group are actually reliable. This will allow lead people in the village or within the group to select the best possible people. And then there will be a bearing on the control cost, and this will allow to cut down the interest rate. And this will then allow to reduce its overall repayment rates. This has advantages, but also disadvantages, i.e. This discourages people from actually taking risks. So what you prevent your colleagues or your teammates to do is, if the repayments are profitable, even if the system is efficient, then it will discourage the risk-taking initiatives. And when groups are very homogeneous at the start, they suddenly become very heterogeneous as business develops. And this will actually prevent people from getting what they most need. So, and as a matter of fact, many institutions have given up and have been giving up joint and severe responsibilities. The Gramming 2 model, which is the current model being applied, is that we now require people to come as a group, organizing loans as a group, but then people are no longer jointly and severely responsible. Basically, anyone in the group cannot be held liable or jointly liable to reimburse money within the group. So what is the impact of this parameter, this characteristic? So basically, this is about defining the selection effect and the control effect separately. So Jean Karen and John Dinman, expert in this field, they conducted two experiments, both conducted in the Philippines. And basically, this was about shifting to the Gramming 2 model. So they started off separating groups already established, working according to joint and severe responsibility. They selected 50% of these groups and said, okay, you're still going to meet up as a group, but you're no longer jointly and severely responsible. 3 years later, the percentage of repayment delay was exactly the same. So this control exposure effect seem to be not so great, as a matter of fact, but there may be a selection effect, and people just were used to actually control whatever they were doing. So there was not any significant difference in that way. So the Green Bank was quite happy with this initial experience, and they conducted a second experiment. So for these 3 groups, they put forward 3 different models implemented in 3 different regions, either the severe and joint responsibility or the individual responsibilities, whilst maintaining group reimbursement or group repayment, so group loan with individual responsibilities, or the repayment over a certain period of time. So for the first one, for the first joint and severe responsibility related loans, and then moving on to the individual responsibilities. Basically, people were forced to select each other, and then they were not. They didn't have to actually stick together. So basically, accommodating or including some kind of building in some kind of flexibilities. What were we able to observe? First of all, you can see that the individual responsibility translates into a much higher failure rate in terms of between individual liability and group liability. If you remember that we didn't have any control effect beforehand, then this is all due to selection effect. Basically, people get better selected, select each other better simply because they know that the liability is going to be shared. And then once this 4% of bad borrowers is cancelled, then you move on to the next part, which with the group liability, individual liability, and the staggered individual. So basically, this you have a first joint group forcing people into getting a better selection, selecting each other better with more attractive interest or repayment terms and conditions. And then sometimes economists have a useful expertise here, and this actually make this experiment actually is making this particular point. This is all just based on what I've told you about, i.e., moral uncertainty, anti-selection criteria. So this actually having an individual liability is sufficient actually in this first case. Even if this joint and severe liability is not such a great element at the level of the group, the structure of the group can still be important to develop microcredit as a support, because in the Grameen 2 model you still keep the group, but people kind of conduct some kind of watch. They basically watch each other, whatever they're doing. So this is about using social capital, i.e. the network of interaction existing between people is actually helping them into doing better, as opposed to summing up all the parties involved. So is the social capital, does this social capital lead to better result, i.e. do people who know each other better get better results? So Martin Kamen has conducted, well, it was not an experiment, it was just concluded into how a CAPRU institution of credit was actually organized. So the way CAPRU as an institution forms the group, well, basically if they don't require people to come as groups, they bring people together. So very simply in terms of on a first come first served basis. So basically this is completely random in terms of forming groups, because people don't get the selection system facility as we talked about. And these people live more or less distant villages, and they may be culturally different from each other. What we can see is that the failure rate and repayment rate, well, repayment rates are higher and failure rates are lower when people live closer together, and when they actually are ethnically closer. So even if this is not through this sort of legalistic related aspect, the social capital is an element of the microfinance activity. So basically, when we're talking about group meetings, weekly meetings, I mean, raises the next point. Is the fact of organizing a weekly meeting a way to provide other advantages, i.e. could people support each other from a technical perspective, could then have a stronger network? So we come back to the Calcutta example with Villepinte example. When we moved from weekly meetings to monthly meetings, we saw that there was no effect whatsoever in repayment terms. Let's check out whether this has an effect on the social capital. So this is a number who visited this house over the past month. So 3% a monthly meeting. So these are the people I invited, so very few of them, and the members, the people I know these that can name. Okay, so basically, if weekly meetings, even if they haven't got any bearings on the repayment schedules, and they haven't, well, the social capitals has actually a bearing. So even if the repayment is still the same, the social capital is actually has a bearing. The makeup of the social capital has a bearing on the result. So basically, how can we assess the success of microfinancing? So, as a lesson to be learned, the characteristics of microcredit that have most attracted the interest may not be the most significant. Microcredit actually functions on quite traditional principles. When this is possible, microfinance institutions offers different terms of payment, repayment schedules. They're very much based on dynamic organizations, so pledges of future credits made to clients that haven't access to any such rate. We have strong incentives for controlling repayments, high interest rates, and competitions between microfinancing institutions with negative effects.
A little concern here. Everything works very well when there are not too many microfinance institutions in one place, because if you just have one microfinance institution, you end up with the Agera, and that's an incitation for you to pay back. But when there are many microfinance institutions in one area, that can have very damageable effect on your intention to pay back, because if you don't get your loan from one institution, you're tempted to go and shop around. There are credit bureaus or credit organizations that exist sometimes to share the information about one client, but that has a drawback. They would steal each other's customers from one another, and this is already what's happening in India. This is why microfinance institutions no longer want to share their information about their clients. So what's the impact of microcredit now, and is it really in favor of the poorest? Well, a surprising conclusion is that, unlike the research carried out on how it works, which is quite vast, we have very little information with regards to the success of this approach, just because for quite a long time we refused to ask ourselves the question. Microfinance institution used to say, we are profitable, we still have clients, so it means that we are of interest to these people, and if we get no subsidies, we don't have to publish our figures, and I have no reason for assessing the quality of my work. A bit like the car manufacturers. As long as people buy car, why should I assess the quality of what I do? But if these microcredit institutions make profit, and some do great profits, others are not profitable. And those who are not profitable are those that lend money to the poorest. And it's not always relevant to try and see if they're relevant, if they are profitable or not, because there are sometimes subsidies, hidden subsidies, like managers of these institutions accept to be paid far less than if they were working in Wall Street. So even if we have, on the one hand, we have very profitable institutions, on the other hand, we also have others who are subsidized, even though this is not done in a very clear way. But, in fact, we have no problem subsidizing schools, health. Why not microcredit? There is no problem spending money to help the poorest as long as there are benefits associated to the costs. So trying to tell people these institutions are profitable has sent a bad signal and sent microcredit institution in a wrong direction, and they all try and publish figures to try and appear profitable, even though when they're not, when in fact they should have focused on showing that they had a positive impact that would justify subsidies. Second mistake, it's not because clients come back and borrow that this is good for them. We've seen that people are not always very sensible, whether us or the poorest, and like we would use our credit cards too much and we find ourselves with too much debt, well, it can be exactly the same thing for the poorest. Lack of information, social pressure lead people to taking too big a debt. And in that case, if that were the case, then microcredit's impact would be quite negative. So, if these arguments and we'll see that in a second, that I do not totally agree with, but if these type of arguments are thrown to the face of microcredit institutions, like what happened in the Mecca of microcredit in India, then microfinance institutions and governments started confronting each other very violently, and we even had physical fights. And they were arguing because the government was saying, you lead poor people to take too large a debt, they can't pay back, farmers are in difficult position and they can't pay back. And the microcredit institutions said, no, we're not worse than usurers, we're very nice people. But they had no proof of their positive impact beyond the traditional anecdotes that they enjoy sharing. So this episode, amongst others, led to an awareness of the need we have to assess the impact of microfinance. And now microfinance institutions are more willing to accept their impact to be assessed. There are many works underway, only one is completed. And this is the one I'm going to tell you about. So as we are late in doing that, we have just one randomized study which has been completed on a microcredit program. This is a study I carried out with many others. We worked on Spandana. This is Spandana. This is a very famous microcredit institution in India, and they were very much involved in this confrontation with the government I was telling you about, and they work with Madhya Pradesh. But at the moment, this program was beginning that never worked in the capital city of the state of Madhya Pradesh. So this is a typical street with the typical businesses funded by the microcredit institution, the Spandana microcredit institutions. So how did we carry out the assessment? Well, the Spandana had not yet started doing business in the city, so they went to the city and they went to a neighborhood and they met people who were willing to start working immediately or later on. In the other areas of the city, they were ready to start immediately or not start at all. And they realized, before randomization, they realized that 16 neighborhoods or districts were not appropriate because in some, these would be the slums where all the thieves would live together, or there were neighborhoods with temporary migrants, etc., etc. So we selected 104 neighborhoods that we selected randomly, and in 50% of these neighborhoods, Spandana started operating immediately, and in the others, they decided to carry out surveys and investigations before they started doing business. So we started carrying out an investigation in 20 households, and then later on, 2 years later, we included 100 households in each neighborhood. Spandana is one of the microfinance institutions that develops the fastest in India. It was set up in 1997 by Pajama Reddy. He was very enthusiastic about it more than 10 years ago, and they have a very large number of clients, and they're operating in 8 different states in India. Their major product is a standard loan inspired from the Grameen Bank. Women are eligible, aged from 18 to 15 years old, capable of working, living in the neighborhood, and having lived there for at least 3 years. And they want women to group by groups of 10. According to what I described earlier. Just to give you an example of who can be the potential clients of Spandana. The average size family is 5 people with an income with monthly expenses of 5,000 rupees. They're poor but not very poor. 98% of children aged from 7 to 11 go to school, and 84% for children aged from 12 to 15. 31% of our households have a business, and many households have more than just one business. These activities or businesses are not highly specialized. 25% shops are selling fruits, very small, with very small assets. That's a very traditional activity, preparing breakfast. That's all you need, a piece of newspaper, banana leaf, a banana tree leaf, and a special frying pan to prepare these donuts. So at the beginning, in the initial study, 69% households had debts, 49% loans were coming from village usurers, and the average interest rate was 384% per month. So what happened with the Spandana? In the control group, 5% people who managed to borrow from Spandana moving to the other neighborhood, and in the treatment group, it's 19% people who borrowed from Spandana moving to their local agency, and 8% borrowing from other microfinance institution only, okay, versus 18% in the control group. So, first conclusion, or first thing we learned from this assessment is that microfinance has many customers, but the penetration of microfinance is not as important as we thought. We're not at 80%, as you can say, which is usually the figure claimed by microfinance institutions, because that's 20% people who would borrow from Spandana after huge marketing efforts from Spandana. Then second takeaway is that the presence of Spandana has an impact and increases the number of people having access to microcredit. So this is for the treatment neighborhoods that we see this difference. It's an 8% difference, and this is where we can measure the impact of microcredit. Now, what can we expect now? Well, to know that, we need to see why people borrow money from their institutions. There are 3 types of borrowers. Those people having a business already and borrow to increase their inventories, people who borrow to start a new business, and people who borrow to pay back a former loan that they'd taken with a village usura at a very high rate. So there are three groups of households with three different types of impact. Those who have a business already and wish to develop it. So if the capital yield is higher, like in Sri Lanka, their consumption should increase. Those who take a credit to start a business, as they need to start the business, buy inventory, buy a sewing machine, whatever, they start making great personal sacrifice and pay back their credit. And for those who pay back a former loan, as they move from a situation when their interest rates were huge to a situation where the interest rates they have to pay is lower, then they start consuming more. So that's for the economic impact. Now, for non-economic impact, Spandana expect an impact on education, health, promoting the role of women, etc., etc. So now, with regards to business creation, has access to credit led to an increased number in new businesses? Well, of course, you can't compare Spandana clients to people in the control group because Spandana clients are not comparable. They've been selected. And we need to compare people in Spandana neighborhoods to people in control neighborhoods. And if you do that, you do realize that, yes, indeed, that led to the creation of more businesses. Not huge, but from 5.3% to 6.9%. But remember that everybody is not borrowing from Spandana. So how can we assess the effect or the impact of Spandana loans? So we can use the same method as the one we used that we used last week with regards to saving you make to quit smoking. If you consider that Spandana has no impact on the setting up of business for those who did not take a loan, this difference between 5.3 and 6.9 is due to those people borrowing money from Spandana. So the effect of a loan would be 1.6% divided by 13%, so that's 12%. So one loan from Spandana out of 8 translates into the setting up of a new business. So that's the figure that you need to take into account. However, keep in mind that this is an over-assessment, because maybe we need to see now if this is an over-assessment or sub-assessment, depending on whether the presence of Spandana and the example of those people taking a loan from Spandana and starting a new business has an encouraging effect on other people in the neighborhood or not. So now, what is the impact on consumption? Let's look at the overall results to start with, and then let's look at things one by one for the different sets of clients I was telling you about, those who already have a business, those who wish to start a business, and those who just want to pay back their loan. So, we do not see any impact on consumption so far. No impact on consumption. But we do see an impact with a significant increase in the consumption of durable goods, investments for their businesses, and a decrease in what people describe as temptation goods like cigarettes, snacks, tobacco, etc. So people buy durable goods and finance it by reducing their consumption in what they call temptation goods. Now, if you look at things on a group-by-group basis, the results are very similar to what we predicted, i.e. those who already had a professional activity would buy durable goods, both for their families and for their business, and they finance it by reducing their consumption in what they call temptation groups, and they also invest more in durable goods. Those who are less likely to start a new business, they consume more of everything, even temptation goods. They pay back their interest rates and they consume more. And those who start a new business, all the money goes into the new business, so they don't consume more in non-durable goods or in temptation goods, but they also have very little money to spend on durable goods, either for their home or for their business. So we'll need to look in the future if this starting a new business translating in a better quality of life. Now, Spandana helps some borrowers to buy assets for their home or their work, and then they make big sacrifices to be able and pay back their weekly mortgage. So now the question is there a change in the behavior in the household? And the answer is none at all. No impact on the education of boys, nor on the education of girls, on the health of boys, nor on the health of girls. The only social impact we can see is the reduction in the consumption of what they call the consumption goods. So who has control over the spendings in the family, in the business? There is absolutely no difference between those people starting a business and those not starting a business. So microcredit is a plus when it's available. Those who have a business already invest in sustainable or durable goods. Others would consume more. So this is not a new way to be an entrepreneur. And microcredit is useful for those who want to be an entrepreneur, and is also very useful for those having a loan at very high interest rates. So it has a social impact, but cannot sort out the problems of everyone. So by and large, Spandana clients increase their consumption in durable goods and reduce their consumption in non-indispensable goods. So it's as if microcredit was a commitment for them to borrow more, to save more. Imagine you want to buy a TV set. You can borrow or save till you have enough money to get more money. But saving is difficult because all these small temptations come along the way, and at the end of the day, you may be incapable of saving enough to be able to buy your TV set. But microcredit, that helps you buy a TV set immediately and forces you saving in retrospect, because the credit agent will come and pay you a visit on a weekly basis to make sure that you pay back. So even if you don't need your TV immediately and you'd be quite happy to get it in a year's time, microcredit could be a very good alternative to saving. And that means that you have to pay interest rates. So, of course, it might seem a bit weird to accept and pay interest rate to feel obliged to save. But this is not the only occurrence of people who would save. I'm not saying that people take microcredits just for this reason, but this could be a valid reason, and this has been described very often. I've even heard a lady explaining to me, we answer what they've done with their money. And she said, I took the money and I put everything back in the bank on an account with no interest rate. And I said, well, why did you do that? And she says, well, I want to marry my daughter, so I need a dowry. So the money is here, and now every week I pay back. So I make sure that I pay back, and that's the only way I can save. And honestly, I was asking many questions because I wanted to make sure that this is what they meant. And there was a large group of women around me, and they said, are you stupid or what? Obviously, this is the way it works. And that's a great benefit for us to do it like this. So some people use it for that. They take a microcredit and they pay 25% interest rate per year, and they just keep it on a standard bank account with no interest rate served. So is this the only thing they do in that bank? Well, no. Now, if you look around the world, when households have many strategies to save money, which costs them a lot of money, they keep cash at home, which can be stolen. There are people who get paid to collect savings in South Africa. And we talked about the tontine system in Africa, where every week people put $100 per week in a box, and the total amount of the box is given to one person once a year. So people are quite willing to pay to protect their savings from the external world, but also from their husband. There is a very interesting conclusion when women in Africa say that they put money in the tontine system to get a protection from their husband, and others to avoid being tempted by what they call temptation goods. But very often banks don't want to take care of very small savings because that's expensive, because they need to open an account and control many things. And in many countries like India, microcredit institutions are not allowed to collect savings, which is a real shame because they can lend money to people, but authorizing people to collect saving is sometimes a bit difficult because you need to make sure that the one collecting the money is not going to take the money and run, as the recent examples have shown. So on the market of credit, there are constraints, but are these constraints similar to other operations on commercial accounts? So as we talked about Kenya, I want to come back to Kenya now. And there is one very frequent business, that's boda boda. That's taxi on a bicycle, basically. And when we carry out experiments in Kenya, that's in this city here. So this is another business, selling of fruits and vegetables. So we took a random sample of people having very small businesses, really small businesses, bicycle taxis, a woman selling rice on the street, and we opened a saving account in a very small village bank funded by Microcredit institution. So you need to invest $5 to open your savings account. There is no interest rate saved, and you can't cash your money back without having to pay. So this is not a saving account as we would call it, but that translates how reluctant banks are to manage savings. So here, our researchers paid for the costs to open the account and looked at whether people would use this account and if that was profitable or not. So for 3 months, this is what they did. They selected a panel of small businesses, which they randomly sorted out into 2 groups. One group was offered the saving accounts immediately, and others were not. And they all wrote down the incidents they had to go through in their lives. Has someone been sick in the family? Has someone had an accident, etc., etc.? So although one of the conclusions is that although the bank account was open, everybody don't use them, but women tend to use the bank account more than men. And 50% women carried out at least one operation on the account in the 3 months period. There is no operations for men because they're not using it, but the impact for women is important. The average purchases made for the company moved from $0.75 to $1.46, so that's a sharp increase. And these accounts help them buy products in bulk, like a big bag of coal. But before you can buy a second big bag of wood coal, you need to save sufficient amount of money. Another thing is that for women, private expenses, food for themselves or buying small items for themselves, have also increased. Having this saving accounts in which they can save money from their husband allowed them to spend more for themselves. So apparently it seems that although only 50% people are actually using the account, productive investments increased by 40%. So for those using the account, so we divide 40% by 50%, and that's an 80% increase in productive investment with just providing access to saving. So you see that the impact is even more important than the impact of access to credit. So access to saving is also very important. Now, is access sufficient? This study does not make it possible to tell, because in this study we provided access to saving, but with many restrictions. And one of the major restrictions was that if the bank would make people pay when they wanted to withdraw money, whatever the amount that you would withdraw. If you have a small withdrawal, that would be a major tax, so to speak. So that was an interest for people to leave money on the account as long as possible and withdraw a big amount of money. So this account is more than a safe place for people to save, but it's also an encouragement for them to save and cash in when they have sufficient money. It could also explain the impact on those who decided to use it.
So beyond the simple access to savings account, which, as we've seen, is extremely limited for the poorest people, because banks turn down any offer to provide savings to the poorest, well, then we can sort of tackle another element, i.e. the time-related incoherence or inconsistency. So are they goods that we appreciate for, or that we enjoy for immediate consumption? So we, as an example, tea is something I can enjoy today, but I'm not going to think about what I'll be enjoying today in terms of, taking this cup of tea. So in terms of standard consumption goods, today I'm delighted to enjoy this television today, but you've got temptation goods and inspiration goods. So ABG, Benadier and Sandil, Mulay-Netan have put forward this model, and they've basically made a clear separation between these two types of goods, temptation goods and separation goods. They take the example of someone who decides to save. So let's say a lady who decides that she wants to set up a business and she wants to save money. She will then have to sacrifice, or to sacrifice my cup of tea today for saving money. So if I'm not spending this money on tea today, I will still think of enjoying this cup of tea tomorrow, but I will need to plan the reappropriation or the repossession, and I will prevent this repossession of this TV set by spending all the money today on this cup of tea. So this is a sophisticated model, i.e. people know that they will be victims of temptation in the future, and this delivers an endogenous phenomenon, i.e. because I will repossess myself in the future anyway, I will get repossessed in the future, I'm now going to decide not to save. But if I can save money with no access whatsoever to this money in a secure place, where money will be accumulated, then I can decide to save, because I can say, well, okay, today I'm saving money, I'm not going to take this and enjoy this cup of tea today, I will not have access to this money up until the point that there will be sufficient money to do something with the money where I can actually buy a durable goods like TV set or some calls for the household. So it is kind of a if you're poor, it is more difficult to save up until the time that you can have enough money on your account to actually buy a more durable type of good. So this discrimination here. Another example of this is that of fruit grocers. So they borrow up to with a 5% interest rate, daily rate. So it means that somebody somewhere is making a huge pile of money. It means that for this small grocers, there's strong incentives to save, because if they save through not borrowing or borrowing less today, this interest rate, if you like, they will benefit from it by cutting down their borrowing. And is that because they're extremely impatient? And are they consuming today because they're extremely impatient? Well, in order to come to this conclusion or to assess the situation, a study was conducted in the Philippines by paying off the debt of these women. And then they were kind of followed up over time. And we tried looking to whether they would actually go back to a position whereby they would be indebted or not. So this is what we can see after 2 weeks. In the beginning, 50% amongst these women get back into a position whereby they were in debt. And then slowly, well, not in debt, but then coming back to a situation whereby they would be in debt. So in the beginning, so the debt is 50% of them go back to a position whereby they're in debt immediately. And then another 50% are in debt, but not that rapidly. So it's not about consuming everything today and then not having any savings. So you've got there's two elements. First of all, people don't spontaneously get out of the position whereby they're in debt, and then people who actually have a problem to not to save. So then there's an endogenous asymmetry here. So this is about protecting savings in a secured saving as opposed to holding the money within their own homes. And also this is about getting to a certain amount of money. So a number of researchers have worked on this. In the Philippines, they conducted a project. They offered a savings account, and they offered an extra product over and above the standard savings account, with no specific terms and conditions. But people can actually set themselves a period over which money is going to be repaid, or they're going to set up an objective, i.e. in order to buy a fridge over a certain period of time. So I will not get access to money up until a point that I'll have enough money to pay for that fridge. So for those, so the findings and conclusions at the end of a year, savings account of those is we reached 189 rupees versus 601 for those who had the opportunity to offer the savings account with this extra terms and conditions. So if for those who restrain their own liberty to have access to money in order to accumulate money in order to reach specific objectives, have had more successful results. So as a conclusion to what I was saying is that when I go back to this grocer's survey, and basically going back in a position whereby they're indebted, this very often this is due to sickness, and shocks are almost so damageable or damaging for those who are very close to survival situations. So, and for those who are beyond this survival position. So, because I'm poor, I'm not going to take any further risk, and then I'm going to remain in a situation when I'm poor or when I'm going to remain in poverty. So there's two reasons why banking institutions can actually put forward extra products. First of all, they have many customers. They can actually limit the risk over a high number of people. And also, they have a widely varied type of customer base. For health insurance, for instance, only the sick will come to buy specific type of products. But if people come for different reasons, I can provide other services such as health insurance. If I can make this compulsory within this package of services, of financial services I'm going to provide, I'm going to cut down or reduce the problem of anti-selection, because these people are now coming in to apply for credits, and then I'm going to provide health insurance cover over and above the basic service. So this is about mutualizing everyone, not only the sick. So the insurance is now the new frontier of banking institutions, with lots of national and international banking institutions like the BIT. Notably, they have insurances related to climate shocks, climate events, health. We haven't reached any conclusions or findings as yet, but basically the interim conclusion is that nobody wants them. In Ghana, for instance, people didn't have to repay their usual loan if the price of their harvest was, even if the price of the harvest was to be cut down. But this basically did not translate into an increase in demand. Second example, in India, a study was carried out on the subscriptions to in insurance against for climate events. So, very simple scheme: $1 was to be paid, and the bank was, if you lose $1, we're not going to check whether there has been any draft or whatsoever. Basically, if you can't get your harvest done, if you're losing money, then the bank will reimburse you, will cover for these losses. So Andhra Pradesh is 3%, Uttar 20%, and people have taken on the value of $1 of insurance, which does not actually reflect the size of their actual fields. In Andhra Pradesh, they added their health insurance to their traditional package, and this translates into a reduction of their renewal credit rate, so moving on from 70 to 59%, although this is not involving any extra charge. So people do not like insurance-related products. How can we explain this failure? Well, these studies are very recent indeed, so we haven't actually conducted a longer-term kind of survey on these particular matters, especially in microfinancing and in the microfinancing sector. So first of all, the concept of insurance is not very well understood, in particular in the case of SGS. Very few people actually use insurance, even if they've subscribed some insurance. So, and then, in terms of credit or savings, they don't really understand what an insurance premium actually is or stands for. How does it work, basically? And secondly, there's a problem, as we've seen in preventive health care systems. When you subscribe an insurance, the cost is, well, right away, is immediate, and the benefit is kind of random. It might not be realized if you don't actually fall ill. So if you have a strong preference for the present, maybe you don't want to actually subscribe to any insurance for this particular reason. So this actually justifies, as in the case of preventive health cover, the intervention of the public sector. In the US, for instance, the insurance is compulsory. But in the poorer countries, you need to go in the private market to actually get such insurance-related products. So where there's a demand for providing viable products. But if we have time inconsistency-related problems, i.e., if we need to actually postpone to tomorrow a small cost where the benefits could be larger in the future, then this leads to products whereby insurance-related products are de facto included in the package, or this can lead to a mandatory system whereby insurance is compulsory. So we need to conduct more research to actually define and see and maybe put forward products that can actually be viable, but it's important to bear in mind that these products can be, as opposed to credits, may never be viable and may always require subsidies. This doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. You shouldn't go ahead, but you should do it with regards to the benefits that can be generated. But before getting results, asking the poor people to go for insurance can come across as a fundamental injustice. As a conclusion, we've placed lots of hope in the microfinance sector. It can not only be a matter of market, but also in terms of evolution. Within a country, we can help and support the poor people to support themselves, getting them out of poverty. So as a matter of fact, this is something that can be definitely attractive. And this actually supports the development of this model where we can actually sell water to people, and we can actually operate in a sort of social enterprise area. So there has been, in front of this enthusiasm, microcredit enterprises have been up in arms because they were actually the ones who would take advantage of the poorer part of the populations. Now, in view of the results that we've got today, we need to have a much more subtle analysis. This extremely ingenious financial innovation has enabled better access to credit for the poor people who would not be otherwise able to access to credit. So without reaching 100% success rate, we also support other households to take in shocks of unexpected events. We also protect people from the village usurers. But it is also important to bear in mind that not anyone is a skilled entrepreneurs or can be one. And this refers to the endogenous asymmetry that I talked about. So microcredit is a great innovation, and we can obviously provide more adapted products from credit, insurance, savings perspective, but some aspects microfinance cannot replace traditional means of fighting against poverty. Thank you very much for your attention.